Boy returns from death with a horrible prediction from heaven. It started as a typical day in the suburbs, but by nightfall, a 10-year-old boy named Liam would find himself teetering on the edge of life and death. What he experienced during those moments would leave his family stunned, his doctors speechless, and a nation on edge. Liam's story begins in an ordinary world, where everything seemed perfect. He was the kind of boy who lit up every room he entered, full of energy, laughter, and a touch of mischief. He loved riding his bike through the neighborhood, playing baseball at the local park, and helping his mom bake cookies on rainy afternoons. To his parents, he was their miracle child, the answer to years of heartfelt prayers. Liam's family lived a life built on faith. Every evening, his parents knelt by his bedside, offering prayers of gratitude for their healthy, happy boy and asking for his continued protection. They couldn't imagine a day without him, and they never thought their prayers would soon take on a desperate, heartbreaking tone. It all started with a fever, nothing out of the ordinary. Liam's cheeks flushed pink as he sat at the dinner table, listlessly pushing his food around his plate. "I'm just tired, Mom," he said with a weak smile. His mother felt his forehead, warm but not alarming. She tucked him into bed early, thinking a little rest would make everything better. But by the next morning, Liam's fever had worsened. His once lively blue eyes looked dull, and he struggled to find the energy to get out of bed. His cough sounded deeper, more concerning. By the third day, his fever spiked to 105 degrees, and panic set in. His parents rushed him to the hospital, praying aloud in the car as Liam drifted in and out of consciousness in the back seat. The ER was a blur of activity. Nurses hurried to hook Liam up to machines as doctors delivered the news. Complications from measles had triggered severe respiratory distress. The virus had attacked his small body mercilessly, and despite their best efforts, the medical team warned the family to prepare for the worst. Liam's parents clung to each other, tears streaming down their faces as they begged God for a miracle. Inside the sterile hospital room, the air was thick with desperation. The beeping machines that monitored Liam's heart and oxygen levels were a constant reminder of how fragile life could be. His mother sat by his bedside, clutching a rosary so tightly her knuckles turned white. His father paced the hallway, his prayers whispered through trembling lips. As the hours passed, Liam's condition continued to decline. His little body, once so full of life, was now pale and fragile. And then it happened. His heart monitor began to slow, the rhythmic beeps growing further apart. A nurse shouted for help as Liam's parents cried out in agony. The heart monitor flatlined, and in that moment, it felt as though time had stopped. But just as his life seemed to slip away, something extraordinary began to unfold. Liam's journey was far from over, and what awaited him on the other side would defy all explanation. It would be a moment that would change his life and the lives of everyone around him forever. The virus attacked Liam's small body relentlessly, leaving the doctors and nurses scrambling to stabilize him. Machines whirred, beeped, and clicked, filling the hospital room with a cacophony of sound that underscored the growing tension. Liam's breathing was labored, shallow gasps interrupted by bouts of violent coughing. His fever, so high it was nearly off the charts, made his little body tremble uncontrollably. His parents were ushered out of the room as the medical team worked, but they stood just beyond the door, their faces pale and wet with tears. They couldn't look away, even as their hearts shattered. Liam's mother clutched her husband's arm, her voice barely a whisper as she prayed, "Please, God, not my baby. I'll do anything. Just don't take him away from us." Her husband, who had always been the steady, silent rock of the family, now found himself trembling, words escaping him as he silently pleaded with heaven for a miracle. Inside the room, the situation became more dire. A nurse adjusted the oxygen mask on Liam's face while another pushed medication through his IV. The lead doctor monitored the boy's vitals on a screen, her furrowed brow a clear indication of how critical the situation had become. "He's crashing," she said sharply, her voice steady but tinged with urgency. Meanwhile, Liam's perception of the chaos around him began to shift. He could hear the muffled sounds of the machines, the distant voices of the medical staff, and even the panicked murmurs of his parents outside the door. But it all felt far away, as though he were underwater, sinking slowly into a deep, dark abyss. The pain that had racked his body only moments ago faded, replaced by an overwhelming sense of calm. And then, in an instant, everything changed. Liam opened his eyes and found himself in a completely different place. It was neither the hospital room nor anywhere he had ever been before. He was standing in what felt like a vast expanse, the ground beneath his feet glowing faintly with a warm golden light. The air around him was thick with a sense of peace and serenity, so profound that it took his breath away. Not that he was even sure he was still breathing. Before him, a tunnel of light stretched endlessly into the distance, its brilliance inviting but not blinding. The light wasn't just a color. It was alive, pulsing gently as though it were breathing. It seemed to call to him, not with words, but with a feeling so pure and comforting that he couldn't resist taking a step forward. As he moved toward the light, Liam noticed figures beginning to emerge around him. They weren't solid, not in the way people are, but more like shimmering outlines made of light and energy. They felt familiar, even though he couldn't quite place them. One of them reached out, their presence radiating love and warmth. Liam felt no fear, only a sense of belonging. "Liam," a voice said, though it didn't sound like a normal voice. It resonated within him as though it were part of his own thoughts. "You are safe, you are loved, but there is something you must know." The figure gestured toward the tunnel, and suddenly, images began to flash before Liam's eyes. He saw Earth, spinning slowly in space, and then the images zoomed in closer. He saw cities, people, events unfolding. He didn't understand most of what he was seeing, but then one image stopped him cold. It was a futuristic-looking truck, sleek and angular, the kind of vehicle Liam would have thought was cool. But in this vision, it wasn't cool. It was terrifying. The truck was surrounded by chaos, flashing lights, screaming people, and the sound of sirens echoing in the background. The scene zoomed closer, revealing a tense political rally outside a towering building Liam immediately recognized as Trump Tower. In the crowd, he saw a familiar face, former President Donald Trump, standing at the podium, addressing a sea of supporters. As the truck barreled forward, the scene erupted into unimaginable chaos. A deafening explosion rocked the area, sending debris flying and flames roaring through the streets. Liam could see the expressions of fear and panic etched onto people's faces, the horror unfolding in slow motion. In that moment, Liam felt the weight of a great tragedy, something that would shatter not only lives, but also the nation itself. The figure beside him placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder as Liam's panic surged. "This will come to pass," the voice said, gentle yet firm. "But you have been chosen to warn others. You must tell them what you have seen." Liam tried to ask questions. How? Why him? What could he do to stop it? But the figure simply shook their head. "Your task is to tell, not to understand. Trust in the plan." The light around him grew brighter, enveloping him entirely. Liam felt himself being pulled backward, away from the figures and the tunnel, back toward the reality he had left behind. The warmth of the light faded, replaced by a cold, sharp sensation that jolted him back into his body. The first thing Liam heard was the steady beeping of the heart monitor. His eyes fluttered open to see the blurred faces of his parents leaning over him, tears streaming down their cheeks. He was alive. He was back. But he wasn't the same. What he had seen was burned into his mind, clearer than any memory he had ever had. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't his imagination. It was real, and he knew he had to share it. The message he carried wasn't just for him, it was for the world. But would anyone believe a 10-year-old boy? As the nurse checked his vitals and the doctor murmured something about a miraculous recovery, Liam closed his eyes and whispered, "Thank you." He wasn't sure if he was thanking the doctors, his parents, or the presence he had met in the light. Maybe it was all of them. Liam's journey back to life was complete, but his mission was only beginning. Liam's recovery was nothing short of miraculous. The doctors, who had braced his parents for the worst, now looked at the boy with a mix of awe and confusion. His vitals stabilized rapidly, and within hours he was sitting up in bed, sipping water with trembling hands. His parents, overcome with joy, took turns hugging him, their tears now of gratitude rather than despair. But as the initial relief faded, they began to notice a change in Liam, a deep, almost haunting seriousness in his big blue eyes. Liam barely touched the toys his parents brought to cheer him up, and he didn't ask to watch cartoons on the small TV in the corner of the hospital room. Instead, he sat quietly, his gaze distant, as though he was seeing something no one else could. He was reluctant to talk at first, but when his mother gently coaxed him, he finally spoke. "Mom," he said, his voice small but steady. "I need to tell you something. It's important." His parents exchanged a worried glance, but nodded, encouraging him to continue. Liam hesitated, his tiny fingers gripping the edge of his blanket. Then, in halting words, he began to recount what he had seen during his near-death experience. He told them about the light, the overwhelming peace, and the glowing figures that made him feel safe and loved. His parents, devout Christians, listened with rapt attention, their own faith stirring at his description of what they believed could only be heaven. But as Liam moved on to describe the vision, the futuristic truck, the explosion, and the chaos at the rally, their expressions shifted. "I saw Mr. Trump," Liam said, his voice trembling slightly. "He was giving a speech, and the truck, it came out of nowhere. There was fire everywhere, people were screaming, and I think he got hurt." His mother gasped, covering her mouth with her hand, while his father's face grew pale. "Liam," his father said carefully, "are you sure? Could it have been a bad dream?" "It wasn't a dream," Liam insisted, his voice rising with conviction. "It was real. The angel told me it would happen. I'm supposed to warn people." His parents exchanged another glance, their emotions torn between belief and disbelief. As much as they wanted to take their son seriously, the idea that a 10-year-old boy could foresee such a specific and catastrophic event felt impossible. For the next few days, Liam tried repeatedly to convince them. Every detail of the vision remained crystal clear in his mind. The sleek design of the Tesla Cybertruck, the building with Trump's name gleaming on its facade, the fiery explosion that tore through the rally, and the chaos that followed. He even drew pictures of what he had seen, his crayon sketches eerily precise for a boy his age. But his parents dismissed it as the vivid imagination of a child recovering from trauma. "Let's not dwell on this, Liam," his mother said one evening, stroking his hair. "You've been through so much. Let's focus on getting you better." "But I'm telling the truth," Liam said, his voice cracking. "If no one listens, it's going to happen on the 1st of January 2025. I know it." Despite his protests, his parents remained unconvinced. They didn't share his vision with anyone, fearing that people might think he was delusional or that they were exploiting his ordeal for attention. Liam felt frustrated and helpless, as though he were shouting into a void. On the day Liam was discharged from the hospital, he begged his parents one last time. "Please," he said, his voice breaking with desperation. "You have to tell someone. You have to warn them." His father knelt down and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "We love you, Liam," he said softly, "but I think you're just confused. Let's put this behind us and move on." Liam nodded reluctantly, but inside he felt a gnawing certainty that he couldn't ignore. If his parents wouldn't believe him, how could he convince anyone else? The days at home passed slowly, and Liam found himself increasingly consumed by the vision. He replayed it in his mind over and over, each detail etched as vividly as the moment he'd seen it. He didn't know when or where the rally would take place, but the date, January 1st, stood out clearly in his memory. He couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. On New Year's Eve, while his family celebrated with a quiet dinner at home, Liam sat alone in his room, staring at the calendar on his wall. Tomorrow was the day the vision would come true, the day everything would change. That night, he prayed harder than he ever had before. "Please, God," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "If no one will listen, show me what to do. Help me stop it." When he woke the next morning, the house was quiet. His parents were still asleep, and the TV in the living room was turned off. Liam sat on the edge of his bed, his heart pounding as he waited for something, anything, to happen. At exactly 8:32 a.m., the silence was broken by the sound of a news alert blaring from the television. Liam raced to the living room and grabbed the remote, his hands shaking as he turned up the volume. The screen showed a scene of devastation outside Trump Tower. Smoke billowed into the sky as emergency responders swarmed the area. The headline read, "Explosion at political rally, multiple injuries reported." Liam's knees buckled and he collapsed onto the couch, his heart pounding in his chest. It had happened just as he had seen. The world he had tried so desperately to warn was now living his nightmare. His parents, awakened by the commotion, rushed into the room and froze when they saw the news. Liam looked up at them, his tear-streaked face filled with a mixture of sorrow and vindication. "I told you," he said quietly. "I told you this would happen." The weight of the truth settled heavily on his parents as they realized their son's vision hadn't been a child's fantasy. It had been a divine warning, one they had ignored. For Liam, the moment was bittersweet. He had been right, but it had come too late. Now he could only hope that his story would serve as a wake-up call to others, urging them to listen to the voices of the innocent and to never dismiss the possibility of the divine speaking through the least expected among us. Liam sat in the living room, his small frame dwarfed by the weight of the news unfolding on the television. The coverage of the explosion at Trump Tower dominated every channel. The footage showed thick, black smoke curling into the sky, emergency responders weaving through debris, and terrified people fleeing the chaos. It was exactly as he had seen in his vision. The Tesla Cybertruck, the rally, the fiery devastation. It was all there, playing out in real life. His parents stood behind him, silent and pale. The gravity of what they were witnessing was written across their faces. They had dismissed Liam's warnings, assured themselves that it was just a dream or the lingering effects of his illness. But now, confronted with the reality of his vision, their doubt turned into guilt. His mother knelt beside him, placing a trembling hand on his shoulder. Her voice cracked as she said, "Liam, But the words caught in her throat. What could she say that would make this right? Liam didn't respond immediately. He kept his eyes on the screen, watching as reporters described the destruction and speculated about the motives behind the attack. Finally, he turned to his parents, his young face etched with a sadness they had never seen before. "It's real," he said quietly. "You believe me now, don't you?" His father sat down heavily on the couch, his head in his hands. "We should have listened," he muttered, his voice barely audible. The weight of their realization settled over the room, but for Liam, there was no comfort in being right. He had hoped, prayed, that the vision was wrong, that it wouldn't come to pass. Seeing it happen exactly as he had foreseen only deepened his sense of urgency. Over the next few days, the story of the attack consumed the nation. News outlets analyzed every detail, and the image of the Cybertruck's destruction became a symbol of the chaos and tragedy that had unfolded. For Liam, it was a constant reminder of what he had tried to prevent, but couldn't stop. His parents, now firm believers in the truth of his vision, decided to share his story with their pastor. At first, the pastor listened with skepticism, but as Liam recounted every detail of his near-death experience and the vision, the man's expression shifted. By the end of their conversation, the pastor was convinced that Liam's message was something his congregation needed to hear. The following Sunday, the church was packed. Word of Liam's vision had spread, and people from neighboring towns filled the pews, eager to hear his story. Liam stood at the front, his small hands gripping the edge of the pulpit. His voice was steady as he described the light, the angel, and the chilling prophecy he had been shown. "I don't know why it happened," he said, his blue eyes scanning the crowd. "I don't know why I was chosen to see it. But I do know that it wasn't just for me. It's for all of us. We need to listen to the warnings we're given, even if we don't understand them." The congregation was silent, hanging on his every word. Some nodded, their faith renewed by his account, while others sat with furrowed brows, struggling to reconcile what they were hearing with their own beliefs. After the service, people lined up to speak with Liam and his parents. Many thanked him for his courage, while others asked questions about his vision, hoping to understand its meaning. But not everyone was supportive. Outside the church, a small group of skeptics gathered, whispering among themselves. One man approached Liam's father and said, "It's just too much to believe. He's a kid, for crying out loud. How do you know he didn't just make it up?" His father, now a staunch defender of his son, met the man's gaze. "Because everything he said would happen, happened," he replied firmly. "He didn't just guess. He saw it, and we didn't listen. That's on us." Back home, Liam felt the weight of his mission pressing on him more than ever. The vision had been fulfilled, but he couldn't shake the feeling that it was only the beginning. The angel's words echoed in his mind. "You must warn others." He began speaking at more churches, sharing his experience with anyone who would listen. Each time, he hoped that his story would reach someone who could make a difference. Some people believed him wholeheartedly, moved by his sincerity and the undeniable accuracy of his vision. Others dismissed him, unwilling to accept the possibility that a child could carry such a profound message. One evening, as Liam sat at the kitchen table sketching yet another drawing of the vision, his mother joined him. She placed a hand on his back and said softly, "You've done everything you could, Liam. Some people won't listen, but that doesn't mean you've failed. You're planting seeds. That's what matters." Liam nodded, though her words didn't fully ease his burden. He felt the weight of knowing something the world wasn't ready to hear. Still, he resolved to keep telling his story, no matter how difficult it was. He knew the angel's message wasn't just about the attack. It was about faith, vigilance, and the willingness to listen to the signs around us. For Liam, the mission wasn't over. It had only just begun. And though he didn't know what lay ahead, he was certain of one thing. He would keep speaking, keep warning, and keep hoping that one day people would truly listen. The weeks following the attack were a whirlwind for Liam and his family. News of his vision began to spread beyond their small community, reaching regional news outlets and even drawing the attention of some national networks. People were captivated by the story of a 10-year-old boy who had seemingly foreseen a national tragedy. Some hailed him as a modern prophet, while others dismissed him as a child with an overactive imagination. Liam, however, didn't care about the labels. His only focus was delivering the warning he had been given. One Sunday afternoon, Liam and his parents sat together at the kitchen table, poring over the dozens of letters and emails they had received. Some were supportive, thanking Liam for sharing his story and expressing gratitude for his courage. Others were skeptical or outright hostile, accusing his family of fabricating the story for attention. "What do we do with these?" Liam's father asked, holding up a particularly scathing letter. "We focus on the people who believe," Liam's mother replied, sorting through another stack. "Liam's job isn't to convince everyone, it's to tell the truth." Liam listened quietly, his hands folded in his lap. He had grown more contemplative in the weeks since the vision came to pass, as though the weight of his mission was maturing him faster than his years. "I think we should answer the ones who ask for help," he said finally, "the ones who want to know what to do." And so, the family began crafting replies to those who sought guidance. They encouraged prayer, faith, and vigilance, reminding people to stay connected to their communities and to trust in divine wisdom. Liam often added his own handwritten notes, short but heartfelt, urging people to listen to the signs they were given. As his story gained traction, Liam was invited to speak at larger gatherings. One invitation came from a prominent church in a neighboring city, where hundreds of people crowded into the sanctuary to hear him. Standing before the massive congregation, Liam felt a mix of nerves and purpose. "I'm not a preacher or a prophet," he began, his voice steady despite the enormity of the crowd. "I'm just a kid, but something happened to me, something I can't explain, and I think it happened because someone needed to hear it." He recounted his near-death experience, the angel's words, and the vision of the attack, pausing to let the weight of his message sink in. "What I saw wasn't just about one event," he continued. "It was a warning, a wake-up call. There are things coming that we need to be ready for. I don't know what they are, but I know we can't ignore them." The audience was silent, hanging on his every word. Some people wept openly, while others sat with hands clasped in prayer. After the service, dozens of attendees lined up to speak with Liam, sharing their own experiences of faith and seeking his advice. But not everyone who heard his story was moved to believe. Online forums and social media erupted with debates over the validity of Liam's claims. Skeptics picked apart his story, questioning everything from the details of his vision to his family's motives. One evening, Liam's parents sat him down to discuss the growing backlash. "We can stop this anytime," his father said gently. "You've done more than enough, Liam. If it's too much, we'll walk away." Liam shook his head, his resolve unwavering. "I can't stop," he said simply. "The angel didn't tell me to quit when it got hard. People need to know, even if they don't want to believe." The backlash only strengthened Liam's determination. He began writing a journal, documenting everything he could remember about his vision and the events that followed. "If they don't believe me now," he told his mother one evening, "maybe they'll believe when the next warning comes." As the months passed, Liam's parents stumbled upon something that deepened their understanding of his vision. While cleaning his room, they found a small notebook tucked under his bed. It was one he had used months before his illness, filled with childish doodles and notes. But among the pages were drawings that stopped them in their tracks. There, in crayon and pencil, were sketches of a sleek, angular truck, flames, and a building with the word Trump scrawled across the top. One page even had a rough calendar drawn in the corner with the date January 1st circled. His mother clutched the notebook to her chest as tears filled her eyes. "He saw it before," she whispered, "even before he got sick." His father nodded, his face pale. "This wasn't just a vision," he said. "It was something he was meant to see all along." When they showed the notebook to Liam, he studied it carefully, his young face thoughtful. "I don't remember drawing these," he admitted, "but I guess the angel was trying to show me something even before I got sick. Maybe I just didn't know how to listen." The discovery only deepened the mystery surrounding Liam's experience. It also reinforced the urgency of his message. "We can't stop now," his father said. "People need to know this is real. They need to listen." Liam continued his mission with renewed focus, sharing his story with anyone who would hear it. He didn't know what the future held or whether his warnings would ever prevent another tragedy, but he had faith that his message would reach the people who needed it most. And for Liam, that was enough. The angel's words still resonated in his heart, reminding him that his task wasn't to understand, it was to trust. With every person he spoke to, every letter he wrote, and every prayer he offered, he felt a little closer to fulfilling the mission he had been chosen for. His journey was far from over, but he knew he wasn't walking it alone. Liam's story had taken him further than he ever imagined. From his small-town church to gatherings across the country, people from all walks of life had heard the account of his near-death experience, the angel's message, and the vision that had foretold the attack on Trump Tower. Some came seeking answers, others out of curiosity, and many left deeply moved. Though months had passed since the tragic event, the memory of it remained vivid for Liam. The explosion, the flames, the chaos. It wasn't just something he had seen. It was something he felt deeply, as though he had lived through it alongside those who had suffered. He couldn't change what had happened, but he could try to make sure people were prepared for what might come next. One evening, as Liam sat on the back porch with his father, watching the sun dip below the horizon, he turned and asked, "Do you think I've done enough?" His father, who had spent the last few months watching his son grow from an ordinary boy into someone with a sense of purpose far beyond his years, placed a reassuring hand on Liam's shoulder. "You've done more than most grown men ever will, Liam. You've shared your story. You've warned people. That's all you can do. The rest is in God's hands." But for Liam, it wasn't just about warning people. It was about helping them see that they weren't alone, that even in the darkest moments, there was a light to guide them. He thought of the angel's words often, their calm assurance that he was safe, loved, and part of a plan far greater than he could comprehend. It gave him comfort, and he hoped it would do the same for others. When Liam spoke at what would become his final public gathering, the crowd was larger than ever. Standing on the stage, looking out at the sea of faces, he felt a profound sense of peace. He began, as he always did, by recounting his experience, the tunnel of light, the angel, the vision of the attack, and the message he was entrusted to share. But this time, he ended with something different. "I've spent months asking myself why I was chosen," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Why a 10-year-old boy would be given something so big, so heavy. And I think I finally understand. It wasn't just about me. It was about all of us, about reminding us to listen to the signs we're given, to take care of one another, and to trust that even in chaos, there's a plan." He paused, letting the words settle over the audience. "I don't know what the future holds," he continued, "but I know we can face it together. We don't have to wait for a vision to do what's right. We just have to open our hearts, trust in God, and be there for each other." The crowd erupted into applause, but Liam wasn't finished. "And if my story has meant something to you, if it's touched you in any way," he said, his blue eyes scanning the faces before him, "then share it. Talk about it. Let others know they're not alone and that there's always hope, even in the hardest times. You never know who might need to hear it." As the applause swelled again, Liam stepped back, a small smile on his face. He wasn't looking for fame or recognition. He just wanted to make a difference, to do what the angel had asked of him. The next day, Liam and his family returned home, ready to embrace the quieter life they had left behind. Though he no longer traveled to share his story, Liam knew it would continue to ripple outward, carried by those who had heard it and been inspired. And as he knelt by his bed that night, his final prayer was simple. "Thank you, God, for letting me help. I trust you'll take it from here." To this day, Liam's story remains a testament to the power of faith, the importance of listening to the signs we're given, and the resilience of the human spirit. It's a reminder that even in the face of tragedy, we can find purpose and hope. If Liam's story resonated with you, consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and if you'd like to hear more stories of faith, hope, and courage, don't forget to subscribe. Together, we can keep the light shining.